500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die.
The Phantom,
the ghost who walks.
The Phantom,
enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you.
G'day everybody, and for those who came in late, you're listening to the Phantom Podcast X-Band. This is episode 91, a very special interview today, interview edition today, where we are talking to an artist, but not just any artist. We are talking to one of a very select few special artists. So my name is Jermaine, and today I am joined by Dan. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very good, Jermaine. Very excited. I do love these podcasts that we record a little bit outside of our normal time frame. We usually record on a Friday or Saturday evening. If you're having to get up early on a Sunday, it means you're touching base with someone in a whole different part of the world. So I do enjoy these interviews. Very excited for today.
Yeah, and your beverage of choice is not a beer at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's a coffee for once.
Well, we'll wait till about 8 o'clock before I hit the beers. No, you're right. Hitting the coffees just to try and get myself up and about for the morning.
Yes, and Stephen. No, Stephen.
He made promises last night that he was going to be here.
It's amazing, and it's like I really feel sorry for Stephen. He misses out on some great interviews.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jeremy, his son, yes. Who's decided to get sick overnight. So we may get Stephen fly through halfway through the episode. I really hope he does. Because he tends to miss out on some great chats. Yeah. So if not, Stephen, we are thinking of you. But anyway, let's introduce to the man. You're here to listen to the man and not just us. So today we have a special guest. There's been less than 10 people who are mentioned in the same category as this guest. Some of those people are Lee Falk, if you like to listen to that part of the history, which was argued against by one of our recent podcasts
He's listed on Phantom Wiki, therefore it's true.
You've got Ray Moore, Wilson McCoy, Cy Barry, George Olsen, Keith Williams, Paul Ryan, Fred Fredericks, and Mike Manley. Yes, we have Mike Manley, one of the few daily artists of the Phantom in the newspaper in the last 82 years. 82 years yesterday as well, so that's kind of ironic. So, welcome, Mike Manley. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How did you celebrate the Phantom's birthday? Is it yesterday, or is it still the Phantom's birthday for you today in America right now?
Today is what, the 16th? I have to look at my phone. It's the 17th here. Is it the 18th there?
That's right. Yeah, so the 17th is the 82nd anniversary.
Wow. See, I wasn't even aware of that.
There you go.
So, nobody from King Features notified me. There was no little, bouquet or box of chocolates shaped like skulls or anything.
Why does that not surprise me?
You might have to go down to the shop and try and find a skull lollipop or something like that, and just nibble on that, and that could and sing Happy Birthday, and that could be it.
They actually didn't even say anything on Comics Kingdom, their own web portal about it, so they may not even be aware. You guys are probably more aware of it than they are.
Well, it's certainly lit up social media in the only way that the Phantom can, in our very quiet corner of the internet, but certainly all over Facebook and Twitter and maybe not Instagram, but certainly those two. There was a lot of happy birthday messages going around the Phantom fan community.
Do you guys have an Instagram for your podcast?
We do. We do. At Chronicle Tweets. We probably need to use it more often than we do. Because, we didn't put an 82nd birthday up yesterday on Instagram, but it did on the other platforms.
It's amazing how many Phantom fans there are out there. I was not aware of. I mean, including my dad, who was a Phantom fan from when he was a kid. In fact, he was probably more excited about me doing this than anything else I've done, because he was a big fan. He could, he remembers all the, the horse and the dog and the adventures. He remembers a lot.
Oh wow,
that's cool. So did he get you reading it as a child then? No.
No. I don't remember reading a lot of newspaper. I mean, I saw them as a kid. I don't specifically remember I think I remember Steve Canyon, and because they still ran that in the Detroit Free Press, because I lived in Detroit as a kid, born and lived in Detroit, and they had Prince Valiant.
Yep. And
Peanuts. I loved Peanuts as a kid. I probably didn't look at any of the soap opera stuff too much as a kid. I do remember the Steve Canyon stuff, because I thought he drew mouths really weird on that profile, and just seemed like a very sort of odd thing. But yeah, my dad told me about Popeye, and he read a lot of that stuff, because he was the perfect age, beginning of the 30s, for when all this came out.
Yeah, that was when you could actually make money as a newspaper artist.
Yeah, well, you can still make money. You just have to do 2 strips like me.
We do want to ask you about balancing that, but how did you? So you weren't inspired then by the newspaper strips to get into art yourself? How did you come into drawing comics?
I mean, I always loved comics and animation, and I remember, we would go to the drugstore or the supermarket, everywhere you went as a kid, there was a news rack, where you could get the comics. So I loved Superman, and I was at the right age when the Batman TV show came out. 1966, I was, 5 when it came out. So I was really into all that stuff, Space Ghost and all that stuff. So I like that, and my dad used to let me take whatever change that he had, and we would go to we had these weird, I don't know if you guys had them in Australia, but we had these things that looked like bubblegum machines, but they were vending machines, and you could see the comic inside, and you'd put your quarter or whatever, your nickel or whatever dime in there, and you'd slide it, and then the comic would drop down. Now I heard they had these in the Midwest, so you would see, oh, that's the comic I want that's on top, but you might have to go through a bunch of comics and hope your change didn't run out until you got that comic that you saw inside the machine.
Right.
So would that be reading the comic through like a ViewMaster type of thing, or would it actually give you the comic? So it would actually
give you the comic instead of it being in a spinner rack or on a shelf. Some stores, they were inside this like machine that looked kind of like a bubblegum machine. There would be several comic things and machines linked together, and so you would put your money in and slide it like you do with like a coin operated coin operated thing, and then the comic would fall out.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I just loved comics as a kid, and I loved drawing, and it wasn't when we moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was 13, and there was actually a comic book store. So before we moved there, we would go up and visit on the weekends from Detroit. It's about 40 miles from Ann Arbor. That's where the University of Michigan is. And we would drive up, but my dad was only off like on Sundays. So every time I would go up, it would be closed. But after we moved, it was called the Eye of Agamotto, named after Dr. Strange's amulet. And I was 13, and so I was finally able to go in and, see the shop, and that's where I basically became, addicted to comics. And that's when I decided that that's what I wanted to be, was a professional cartoonist.
And so how did you go about with that? Did you have to do some studies or?
Well, unlike today when there are, there's the internet and there's a million schools everywhere where you can go and get instruction. There wasn't. The first time I was aware, like a lot of people of my generation, first time I was aware that there was a school was the Joe Kubert School.
Yep.
And I remember that because you'd see the ad in the comics. They'd have an ad for the Joe Kubert School. But no, I did not have any classes on drawing comics or anything like that.
So you were self-taught?
Yep. I mean, I was very serious when I was 13. My grandfather was a commercial artist, and I had two kinds of art classes in high school. I had fine art and commercial art, or vocational art. The vocational classes consisted of doing paste up and key lining and all that kind of production work, which is the way things were put together before desktop publishing, and then running a printer. So you do darkroom work, you learn how to run the press. So I started doing that when I was around 15, and with that I was able to start getting a job working in a small local ad agency doing the same stuff. But I had, how to draw comics the Marvel way. I had the Disney Illusion of Life book. I got both those from my grandmom. And, you tried to study as much as possible. You'd read the Comics Journal or anything, Hunt, any bookstore, anything that would show you any kind of process on how that, I was fortunate that my grandfather was a commercial artist. He was also what you would call a display letterer. So he did lettering by hand. He had an Andrew Loomis book that he gave me, Fun with a Pencil. And that helped me, sort of gave me a good primer on how to learn how to sort of construct figures. And then, like everybody else, you just sit there and you draw a million pages. You just draw and draw and draw. I was very serious about wanting to do that, and I realized from watching, The Wonderful World of Disney, where they would show the animators, that there were actually people that actually did this for a living.
Yeah. So how did you get your I guess your break into the comic world? Was it were you always a full-time artist, or did you have to apply your trade doing it at night times? And
no, well, what happened was I worked as a commercial artist until I was 23, and that's when I went to the Chicago Con. I showed my samples around, and I got a job helping Judy Hunt draw the robots for Robotech, which DC was publishing at the time. And from that, I talked to Joe Orlando, and I started getting a little freelance from DC. And from then on, I had work. I almost had work before that, because I met Brett Blevins when he was moving from Las Vegas to New York, because he had gotten a contract to work with Marvel. And his uncle used to work and was friends with the guy that ran my local comic store, Norm. He was friends with Norm. And so I met Brett when he was coming through Ann Arbor to visit his uncle on the way out east. And through Brett, I actually had contacts, and we became like good friends, the first time we met. So I went out. I drove out from Michigan to New York, stayed with Brett, and went into Marvel. And I could have had work if I could have stayed in New York. It would have given me, again, more robots. It was like robot book that they were putting in toys, because Marvel and DC used to do a lot of that stuff. If there was a toy company, they would put, like a comic inside. So
yeah,
they didn't trust me yet to take the stuff back to Michigan, and I didn't feel at that point that I could probably impose on Brett to stay, and I didn't have enough money to go like rent a hotel or something. Although I'm sure I probably could have. New York was very different then. It was a lot cheaper. But I started doing that, and then from that, you do one job, and then took the DC stuff to Marvel and go, you like to draw robots, and then they gave me an issue of Transformers, and then they just led to once you have one job and you turn it in and it's pretty good or decent, and you don't blow your deadline, then usually, they're happy to give you more work.
Oh, wow. So what are some characters you've drawn over your period as an artist?
I guess as have been published, is that what you mean, Jan?
Yeah. So, I know, I think it was your brother that posted something on your Facebook that you've done a Black Panther as well, and you said you've done a Transformers and...
Yeah, I've done... And at that time, while I was doing that stuff, I also did a lot of activity books and kids books and things. So I've done everything from... At one point, I was drawing Muppet Babies and Conan at the same time. So quite a mix. So yeah, I've done all kinds of different things, and so I've done Conan and Batman, Superman, Shazam, Spider-Man, Captain America. Worked in animation, working on shows like Samurai Jack, the Batman Superman shows, Batman Beyond, Fairly Odd Parents, the Adventure Brothers. So I worked on a lot of different things.
Oh wow. So I guess like growing up and even now, who would be some of your heroes in the comic industry that that you follow, or that was an influence to you?
Well, my main influences are the I guess would be the Golden Age and the Silver Age. So all the classic strip guys, Foster, Raymond, Kniff, Frank Robbins, and then like and then the 60s guy, of course, all the classic Marvel guys from, Kirby, Kane, Buscema, Garcia Lopez, Neil Adams was a huge influence on me as a kid. Joe Kubert, Al Williamson, Wally Wood, Frank Frazetta. And then when I was a teenager, then my mind was blown when I started seeing work by people like Mobius and Richard Corbin, because I started seeing the European stuff through Heavy Metal when they started reprinting that stuff in the States.
All right, yep.
So, yeah, all that. I still, I loved all that stuff. And still love that stuff, that's the stuff. And then as you get older... I started being able to see some of the other strip stuff because, now everything, the people growing up now are so fortunate in that you can basically type anybody's name in Google and you get a bajillion samples of their work, or there's, complete reprints of everybody's stuff. So I remember I saw a picture by an artist named Franklin Booth when I was a teenager, and really liked it. His stuff was he was a pen and ink artist from the turn of the century. Very influenced on Bernie Wrightson when he did his Frankenstein book. But I didn't see another picture by that guy for, probably 10 years. So I always knew, here's this guy who I really liked, but there was no book on him that I could find at that time. Now there's like a couple books on him. And if you just type in Franklin Booth, like everything he's probably ever done is somewhere on the internet. And in fact, there's a Facebook group just about that, about that. So, and then, I loved, Chuck Jones and Toth and Disney, and, I liked animation, illustration, and comics. So it all kind of mixed together for me, because most of the people I liked, artists I liked, they could do, seemed like they could do anything. They could do something for animation, or they could do a comic, or they could do an illustration.
Have you ever done any animation work, Mike?
Yeah. I started storyboarding in 1996 on the Superman show that Bruce Timm and those guys did. And then I worked on the Batman show, the Batman Beyond, and like I said, Venture Brothers, Samurai Jack. I started doing I basically left comics in 96 and started working in animation. And I did that pretty much full time until I went back to school. And then the way things ended up working out, I ended up taking over Judge Parker when Eduardo Barreto passed away. And so I stopped doing storyboards, because storyboards is pretty demanding, and it was hard to do that when I decided to go back, and because I didn't have a degree, I had started teaching, and so I decided I wanted to go back to art school, and so I went, starting in 2007, I went back to art school. So I was a full-time student, taught, and was a full-time cartoonist at the same time.
Wow. That's
so
right. So I was going to ask you how you balanced doing Judge Parker and the Phantom daily strips, but that'd be almost a holiday by comparison with that period of your life, I would imagine.
Yeah. But you get into a rhythm, and I think you just sort of do. To me, going back to school was purely a pleasure, because it was about going back for myself as an artist to make myself a better painter. Yeah. And so that was different than maybe a lot of people, because they're not going back. I mean, maybe older people, if you go back, I didn't start art school until I was 45. So I went to one semester after high school when I was 19, and I dropped out. And so I didn't go back to art school until I was 45. So there was quite a stretch there.
But you had a lot of real world experience in the meantime. So.
True. And then I think I was a much better student being older, because I knew what I wanted to learn. I knew why I wanted to learn. I was much more disciplined. Yep. And I think I was always very serious about being an artist, but I think you learn, you study better, you practice better. Just that working out in the real world, it sort of like sharpens your edge.
And you like you said, you decided you want to go there a lot of the time, and Dan's a teacher, so I'm sure he could agree with this. A lot of the time when you have younger people going to school, it's because they have to, or because they're mum's threatened to kick them out of home if they don't go to school, or something like that.
Well, so it's exactly what Mike said there before about wanting to be there, knowing why he was there, and knowing what he wanted to learn. I mean, that's the perfect student. You dream of having students like that in your classes.
Well, I think one of the reasons that led me to go back to school was I started teaching. Yeah. On 2000, I started teaching. And
so were they art classes you were teaching, or?
Yeah, they were art classes. I started teaching storyboarding and drawing for animation and drawing for illustration. Yeah. And I was sort of jealous of my students and saying, man, I wish I had, and I actually wanted to go, where I wanted to go was Art Center in Pasadena, where a lot of people go. And I'd actually, in 1980, I read an article in a magazine where they said that Hanna-Barbera was still going at that time, and they had a trainee program. So I think the thing that I realize now, if I had lived in New York, I would have started working in comics when I was a teenager. But being in Michigan, there were no, and I also didn't live in L.A. If I lived in L.A., I probably could have started working as a teenager because there was a lot of cartoonists and people in Hollywood that I could have been an assistant to. But being in Detroit, being in Michigan, being in Ann Arbor, there were no, cartoonists or anybody doing that kind of thing. So I wanted to go, I was thinking about going to either Cal Arts or Art Center, which I think Art Center was like $3,000 then. It's like $60,000 now. It's crazy. But I called out to Hanna-Barbera to find out about that trainee program, and I was thinking, well, maybe I would get a job or keep my job during the summer, save up, and move to LA and try to get a job. But the guy I talked to on the phone was like some old, bitter old guy, and he's like, "Oh, you don't want to work in animation, kid. It's a shit business." And so I was pretty discouraged after that. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I don't want to work in animation. So, I started teaching, and that led me to decide to want to go back to art school, which, I think is like the best thing I've ever done for myself as an artist.
Yeah, cool.
So how did you come to start drawing the dailies? And I'm assuming you started with Judge Parker?
Right. So I think it was around 2006. I did 2 jobs for King of the old Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin, the Secret Agent Corrigan. So there was a Egmont was a company in Scandinavia, I think.
Yep.
So they were reprinting like older strip stuff, and then they would put new stuff in. So I did 2 stories with X9.
Yes.
With Brendan Burford, who was the editor at the time, and so I got to know him then. And then when Eduardo got sick, they needed somebody to fill in. So I started on Judge Parker because my buddy John Hebink had done some. And then it became obvious that Eduardo was not going to be able to return to the strip. So my temporary replacement became permanent. And then, unfortunately, when Paul passed away, it was the same thing. I mean, the strips, there has to be a strip every day. You can't put a reprint in the paper. Partially because I think of the contracts. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that, but if you're buying the strip, like there are some strips like Peanuts, when Schultz passed away, they kept running it, but there was obviously going to be reprints. Yeah. So they have to find somebody usually within like when Alex Raymond died in that car crash, they had John Prentice, I think, within a week working on the strip.
Wow.
So you really don't, you have maybe a month, maybe 2 lead time. Yeah. So you really don't have much time between, if something happens, like if somebody gets sick, you have to find somebody right away. And you have to find somebody who it can produce, because there's a lot of guys who could probably sit down and draw the Phantom and do a nice job. But there are very, very few people who could sit down and draw 365 Phantoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much notice?
You have to be fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how much notice did you get when you took over from Paul on the Phantom? Because that was he passed fairly suddenly as well.
Right. He passed away, and I was on the book within a week. I was on the strip within a week. And he had a little cushion. and I was aware of the strip. I was like Siberia and everything, but I was not because they don't run it in any of the newspapers around here, so it's not like I would ever be able to read it. I mean, I could see it online. So I was very fortunate in the fact that between Terry Beatty, who was still doing the Sundays, and Tony, they helped me quite a bit in the beginning because they knew way more about the character than I did as far as the reference, because there's a lot of reference on a character like this. And, it's not easy to find stuff. Like King has stuff, but they don't basically say, okay, Mike, here, you're doing the Phantom. Here's 80 years of the Phantom.
Yeah.
It's the same way on Judge Parker. It's like, I don't think I'd seen the strip, but I was never a regular reader of the strip. And it's like, okay, here you go, run with it. So luckily, Woody Wilson, who was the writer at the time, had been writing it for 30 years. So.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, we talked to your Sunday counterpart probably a couple of months ago, Jeff Weigel, and he said very similar that Terry Beatty and Tony DePaul were very, very useful in helping them and prepping them and stuff like that. So it's good to hear that.
Yeah, I mean it's a very odd job because they basically never hear from anybody from the syndicate unless there's some kind of change or there's a misspelled word or something like that. They basically get the script from Tony or Francesco, and I draw my stuff and I put it out either on the server or I send it in over the email, and check shows up in my bank account, and you don't really ever hear from the syndicate,
Yeah, I assume probably the fans are probably like that as well. You only ever hear from the fans when they don't like something.
Yeah, that's always been the case. I think the internet makes that actually worse now.
Yeah.
I think you have two kinds of fans. 99% of the people who read anything, any strip, enjoy it.
Yeah.
And the most of the people don't tend to write. Most of the people sit down, they got their paper in the morning, they read the funnies, they're happy, they go to work or get off the train, and then you have the whole weird, snarky internet culture of fan entitlement who just like to show up and every day and piss on your leg, like a bad neighbor's dog, come over and take a dump on your lawn. And what I never understood about that is there's plenty of stuff I don't like. A lot of stuff I don't like. I don't go every day to go read it and go, damn it, I still hate it today. I hated it yesterday, and I really still hate it today. That I don't get.
Yeah, I probably actually know half of those people's names that go on Comic Kingdom and dump on everyone's lawn, so to speak.
So that's obviously a tough part to deal with, but I guess do you have to just go water off a duck's back and move on, or?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is a lot of times people, I have found that people were being very rude and I think kind of disrespectful to creators, where they would never say that to you at a convention to your face.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I was one guy who had written in, and then he had started writing on my blog, and he was kind of a Weisenheimer, and I said, how about if I just show up to your job every day and say everything that you do is shit? Everything you do is crap. And I mock you in front of your boss. I don't think you would find that funny. Now, you don't have to do my work. You don't have to think that I'm a genius with a pencil or anything. But, I just think that the internet encourages that really bad aspect of people's behavior in a way that they would not do it if their only way they could do was do it to you in person. They could say, well, I didn't like that story as much, or I wish this was a little bit different. And I find, I've been a fan, let's say, since I was a kid, right? Since I liked comics as a kid, and all through my teenage years, and, all through my professional career. I find now in the last 15 years, because of the internet, the attitude in the fan entitlement is crazy, when there is more entertainment now than there has ever been in the history of the world. Yet people are like, the new Star Wars comes out and it's like, you destroyed my childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how have you found the Phantom fans, with a PH, of course? Have you found that they're generally good, or you find that they're just as bad as everyone else you've dealt with, or?
For the most part, the Phantom fans are very good, because I think that they've been reading it for a long time. There are some people who are, it's never going to, Lee Falk is not rising from the grave. He's not going to write anymore. All right. He's not the writer who walks. All right. He is deceased. And some people are never going to get over the fact that it's me and not Cy Berry, and it's Tony and not Lee Falk. Yes. And there's a couple people on there that, every day say they, how this is, bringing down one of the pillars of Western civilization. But some of them are good. And I've also found that if I go on there, I don't go on very often, but every once in a while I will go on and, comment or point out something. People will be, the one thing about the Phantom fans that is very different about the Judge Parker fans, let's say. So the Phantom fans have been reading the strip for a long time. They tend to be very knowledgeable about guns. So I was the story where Kit Jr. went to the Himalayas.
Yep.
Yes.
And I drew, and it's supposed to be, so it's like a Chinese, the guy based, and I based him on Mako, the guy that the Phantom hired to watch over his son.
Yeah.
I drew a Chinese Mauser, right? So there's different kinds of Mauser, so I tried to find an old Chinese Mauser. And then there was a couple people like, well, I don't know if that's the kind of Chinese Mauser that this guy would have, or that the metal would be this or that. And I'm like, wow, it's a comic strip. So a guy running around with purple underwear in the jungle would be dead in a day because he would be dehydrated. Right? I mean, so there has to be a sort of a suspension of disbelief. But a lot of people they're like, the last story they were looking at, they were saying, he called for the helicopter to come back and get him with the computer, which goes to a satellite dish that's on the roof of the little bunker there that was on top of the table.
Yeah.
Right. And people are like, well, is that a satellite thing? Is it this? How did he get the power up there? Like some people almost ruin, I think, the fantasy because they want all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And I think you have to back off that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's completely unreal. The whole strip is completely unrealistic. There's no way a guy can live in a cave in the middle of Africa and not have been discovered by now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're coming up to 2 years now, within a fortnight or 3 weeks of 2 years of you being on the strip, Mike. Has it improved at all over the time that you've been on, or just the same snarky comments?
No, I mean, I like the Phantom fans, and you're always going to have a few, turds in the punch bowl, but that's just the way it is. I mean, I've learned that from being in comics for over 30 years now. You know, you're gonna have people that love everything you do. You're gonna have people come up and go, you and X artist who you might personally think is the worst artist in the world are their favorite artist.
Yeah.
But most fans are very nice. You always have just a few people that like to rile everybody else up. But I find that the fans, like I said, are very knowledgeable about the strip, knowledgeable about, so I know when I'm doing it, and I'm that way anyway, that I try to do the reference. I try to do, that's where Tony is very good. He'll send me reference. Terry helped me with reference. You guys help me with reference. Because it's hard to go back through, 80 years. And in fact, the strip is not consistent because going through stuff, the size of the skull cave changes radically from story to story. I got two stories that had Walker's Table in it, and each one Walker's Table looked different.
Well, there has to be some opportunity for artists to put their own stamp on things too, doesn't there?
Well, that's true. I mean, but even Cy Berry who didn't draw. He had other guys drawing it for him too, and then he would ink it. They did not draw everything consistently the same. Just like the foliage outside the skull cave, right? So when I started, I was going through and trying to find the skull cave, and I couldn't find a picture of the Phantom and the entrance of the skull cave. So I know there's a skull cave, but how big is the mouth, right? How big is it? 12 feet? Is it 20 feet? Is it 100 feet? You don't know when you just see that shot. And then I found one that had the Phantom and Goren standing, and then I saw another one where the scale was completely different. So throughout the history of the strip, even the shape of his mask, the shape of his stripy underwear, the width of the belt, if you look at the beginning of the strip, what Barry was doing in the beginning of the strip, and then you look at what he was doing, 6 or 7 years into it, it became what you think of as his style, but his style was kind of all over in the beginning, also partially because he was having other guys pencil it.
Yeah.
Did you? Because part of Cy Barry's story would be that he was asked to match Wilson McCoy's style as part of the transition. Was there any of that come from King Features saying that you had to try and be consistent with Paul Ryan's style that had preceded you? No. There was a little bit. So on Judge Parker, when Harold Ledoux stopped drawing it and Ed Barretto took over, he tried to match Ledoux's style. And then I tried to match Eduardo's style a little bit. And not that there's that much difference, it's not like Al Williamson and Don Martin or something, where it's just radically different, styles. And my stuff is not that different than Paul's. You know what I mean? It's sort of yeah. And the way I always come to think of doing these strips is I'm like a character actor. So I'm playing King Lear. And let's say King Lear has been on Broadway or Hamilton, right? A new play. And so I'm going to come on now, the something happened or the guy, that actor has left, and now you're playing that role. So I'm sort of doing a Cy Berry-esque style in a way, which is not that dissimilar, since I like that kind of classic look to the strip. Ironically, I followed Paul because Paul worked on Quasar for Marvel, and then he left that, I think, to go do the Fantastic Four, and then I took over Quasar after he left. So I've actually followed him twice. So I look at it as sort of playing a role, because
while they're both sort of realist strips, Judge Parker is more, I always think of as more John Romita or Leonard Starr or Stan Drake. And, the Phantom, I'm sort of doing sort of Cyberry, because I also sort of feel that the fans expect a certain amount of continuity in the style. Like I would, if I was a fan of the strip. Like if I say I like reading Prince Valiant, and then they go get a guy who draws, I don't know, like Jim Lee, right? Nothing against Jim Lee, but if like Jim Lee started drawing Prince Valiant, it'd be like, no, that's not what Prince Valiant looks like. I've been following this strip for 80 years, and suddenly, it has, he looks like Superman or something. That's not the kind of style, I think, so, and I like doing different styles, and I have, like I said, a big affection for those classic comics. So I sort of feel like I'm playing like a character actor. I'm playing a role. I could draw him in an animated style or any kind of style, but I sort of feel like I'm doing a classic comic strip, so I'm doing a classic comic strip style. And King, that's also, I think, one of the reasons why they wanted me, because they know that's what I do. Yeah. There's not that many guys left who can do it.
Yeah. So when you've been going back and looking at all of these old strips, did you go through, were you looking solely at the art, or were you actually reading the stories? And
I would read some stories. I would read some of the stories, and I would look at some of the art. And it was a really mixed bag. Like some people say were complaining that there was no fantasy, but there was a lot of fantasy in the old strip.
Yeah,
a lot of weird stories. I mean, somebody writes a comic strip for what he started in 30?
36. Yeah.
36. He wrote a lot of weird stories since 1930.
Yes.
And I also think that what you read when you're 12, with some people, that sort of like imprints on them, and that's what they want.
Yeah.
100%. Yes. We've created on the podcast, we've created a word for that. We call it forkist, or a forkism.
Forkism?
Yeah, or forkist. So it's kind of like a cult of forkism.
Look, I'm probably on the podcast as the resident forkist in a way. I'm not as old as most of them, and I'll put my hand up and say I do enjoy the Lee Falk stories more than I enjoy most of the other stories. But you're absolutely right in what you say is that at different decades perhaps Lee Falk would go through different phases as you would over writing the strip for 60 years or whatever he did. So there certainly are those fantastical stories more from the 70s, I suppose, or late 60s, and then the grittier stories, from the 30s and 40s. So, like you say, what people read when they themselves were kids are probably what imprints on them, and they decide that's what the print should always, the strip should always be.
Right, and then you also deal with the fact that the syndicate. So, what people considered to be violence in 1936 is not what people consider to be violence now. Yeah. And I have already had issues on Judge Parker where certain newspapers I had to change, like people pointing guns at each other. And I'm sure if that same paper ran the Phantom, there would be hell to pay, because he still punches people and he still has gunplay. The amount of violence that some people want now would not go over in the comic strips. So it's a weird position, because you're trying to do stuff that appeals to readers today, right? So you can't be Pollyanna about it, because then that's unrealistic. But you also don't want to be overtly violent, because the Phantom is not Batman.
Yes.
All right, the Phantom smiles. Batman no longer smiles, and he's a terrible character now, right? He was actually a detective. He was a detective, right? And so you see all the elements that they took from the Phantom and they put in Batman have now been basically narrowed down to he's just a guy who has that terrible voice, and he's always mad at everything. Mm-hmm. He's no longer a detective. He no longer has a personality. The stories that everybody loves, the stuff that they were doing with Denny O'Neil and Adams, and that stuff has basically been eliminated once The Dark Knight came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think there's a certain amount of fans who would prefer, the older fans want 1936 or 1962 or whatever.
Yeah.
The younger fans want him to be gritty and grim and mess people up and, and I think that would change the nature of the character. He's much more violent in the comic books than he is in the comic strip.
Yeah.
The Phantom, yeah.
What's actually interesting is a lot of the early Phantom stuff got heavily edited in Australia, in Europe, and even for instance, there's a couple of scenes from the Phantom Goes to War story where he's fighting the Japanese in the jungle. And then also on, I think it was The Seahorse, which was another Ray Moore story, which had a picture of Diana strapped to the front of a cannon. And then in the Phantom Goes to War, there was Diana and Byron tied to the jungle floor with sprinkled sugar all over them, so they'll get bitten and eaten alive by ants and stuff like that. So a lot of that type of stuff got heavily edited and a lot later.
When it came out then. When it came out, it ran, but then when they collected it later, they edited it?
Yes,
that's right. Yeah, certainly through in Australia at that period where the Diana getting strapped to the cannon that Jermaine talks about, that got changed to her being strapped, just tied to the railing around the ship sort of thing. So
how's that any better?
not about to be blown to bits, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess. But you still have the people have a fetish for railing, so it's the same things.
That's right.
So even the Phantom's been subject to some editing before.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to run up against that now because the world is such a violent place, and what was once the kind of thing that you would never see on primetime TV. I mean, what was G or PG is way more hardcore now. So I think the thing is that the older people are happy to come and read. I mean, they even had that on Judge Parker. So I've made the girls older because the girls were 10 for forever. And then when I came on, Woody said, "Oh, make Sophie, who was the youngest of the two, make her 16." And then I actually had some older reader write me and goes, "She's way too old and looks way too sexy." So see, you try to update it and you try to give people cell phones and I mean, it looks weird to draw the Phantom with a cell phone.
Yes.
But you have to, or then you can't write 1930 stories anymore.
Yeah.
No.
So do you have an opinion, and Mike, you drew the Death of Old Man Moz story. Do you have the Curse of Old Man Moz story, which alluded to the death of the 21st Phantom? Do you have a thought or an opinion as to whether Phantom number 21 is going to have to pass the mantle to 22, whether that is Kid or Heloise at some point?
I don't think that will happen. I think the only way that would happen is if there was a film that came out that was super successful, and then that film where there was an Indiana Jones where they were supposed to introduce the guy, his son, who was going to take over, right? And then maybe they would make films with the younger version. I don't think so. I mean, it's so stretched out and unrealistic at this point. I mean, the Phantom would be 100 years old, easy. You know what I mean? I mean, if he fought Hitler, he'd be dead.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. He would, you know. So it already makes no realistic sense if you look at the timeline of the stories, because it's just like with the Fantastic Four. The Thing had a beetle wig at the end of it at one of those annuals. It's like, you know, you can't make it real beyond a certain point. You know, I mean, it's like I face that with Judge Parker too, because now people have cell phones. In the old strips, everybody talked on the phone. They had a cord.
Yeah.
You know, so if I update the Phantom, he still lives in the cave, but he has a computer.
Yes.
You know, he talks to people on a satellite.
Yeah.
You know, are you going to draw him with a flip phone? Or are you going to draw him with an iPhone?
Yeah.
Is it iPhone 4? Is it an iPhone 10? I mean, my feeling on Judge Parker was that it was 2012 for a long time. Mm-hmm. Because the stories were so long, right?
Yeah.
We've just gone, I'm on the 5th week of the next story arc right now. And he's going to be fighting he's going to be fighting the Nomad. Oh. So how much time there was between the end of the one that just ended today and the beginning of the Nomad, who's to say? Is there 2 weeks? Could there be a Phantom story that, you know, happened between that we could talk about later? I think you have to be, in order for any of this stuff to work, you have to be willing to suspend your disbelief. You have to update it enough so that it doesn't look like people are going, come here, I oughta, you know, like 1930s dialogue. He's fighting guys who have guns who don't look like, they're not using, you know, M1s anymore. They're using AR-15s and, you know, modern weaponry. So I think, you know, it's harder for us to write and draw the Phantom than it was for the previous guys, because the stories were older, but because they were older and closer to the origin of the character, it was much more contemporary. And what you were drawing in 1957 or 1946 or 1966 was actually much more contemporary, made more sense in the, you know, just timeline wise. Now, I'm still drawing the same guy that, you know, Barry was drawing, starting in what he started with, 60, 62 or something, 61, somewhere in there.
I think, yeah.
Right. How many years, if you added it all up, how many years have gone by? Because it's not a direct chronology, like day by day. That's the other odd thing, is there's so many people that read the strips now who have a hard time with that, with the chronology thing. Like they think, oh, if 2 days went by in the strip, like 2 dailies, well, that's actually like 2 days. And it's like, no, 2 weeks could be 1 day, depending upon how many events or things you're drawing. You're breaking it down.
Or it could be, back in the day, it could be 2 months while he crossed the Atlantic by boat.
Exactly. So I do notice that modern readers often seem to have a problem with that. And I think that's because they compare comic strips to other media.
Yeah.
Completely different beast. You have 3, maybe 4 panels if I squeeze it in a day. They're shrunk down. So Tony is very good about minimizing the writing and being much more to the point, so that the art in an adventure strip, you know, and it's hard because it's shrunk down. And I try to give scope and scale and drama, but it's tough to do that when you have, you know, what is shrunk down. It's like maybe 4 inches, 3 inches in some papers. And then they take it and they stretch it, you know. I mean, it looks great online. The best thing to read it is online because you can see the art the best. But it's tough because if you made him like the Phantom. Wasn't there one where like there was a girl making a song about him or something? A story with a little girl the last couple of years. I think when Paul Ryan was still working.
Oh, I know the one. She was in. It wasn't a song. It was a book or something. She was a newspaper reporter, and he got amnesiaed or something. I think she got amnesiaed. I think from memory.
Okay. So it's much harder for us to make it contemporary and try to appeal to modern readers, not alienate the old readers.
Yeah.
You know? But you can't really do certain types of stories now. But I don't think that they would get to the point where you would probably switch off with Kit. I don't even know if the Syndicate would let us kill him off.
Well, we had lots of fun discussing it in the Phantom universe when
certainly throughout the story, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It really got a lot of people back onto reading the story, the newspaper strip daily, trying to figure out was this going to be the day when we saw the 21st die. And I think most people knew it wasn't going to happen, but the way, and I think personally, I think this has probably been your best, well, my favourite of the stories that you've been involved in. I found it interesting trying to see how you and Tony were going to navigate that process where, you know, you showed the Phantom dying, and then how were you going to show it so it was, you know, how Old Man Moz was wrong, but he was still right, and I enjoyed the story a lot.
Yeah, it was fun. I think that was my second story, so I was feeling more comfortable. I mean, I've been doing Judge Parker starting on my 8th year, so I feel very comfortable. I know the characters well. I feel like they're like real people. Like if I think of The Thing, or Batman, or Superman, I think of them, or Bugs Bunny, I think of them as a real person, right? I think of them as distinct, living personality, even though it's all illusion. It's just lines on paper, right? I feel that way about Judge Parker. I'm starting to feel that way about the Phantom. It's a much more difficult strip than Judge Parker, just because of the reference involved. Like I'm doing stuff with the Jungle Patrol now, which I had not. I think I've only drawn those people a couple times. So there's a lot of reference with things like that. So I might draw Warboo like 4 panels, then I might not draw him for a while again. So I don't really have a familiarity with him.
Sure.
And when I think of the characters, I sort of cast them like actors, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking of Sam and Judge Parker as being like Chad Everett from the old 60s TV shows, because I think that's kind of who he was modeled on, you know, like one of those old TV actors.
Okay, yeah.
You know, I would think, you know, I don't really have a model for the Phantom or Kit, because it's like I don't draw him enough as Kit, and I draw him as the Phantom, but I don't have a like an actor in mind in a way. So that makes it a little like I don't think, oh, he's like you know, James Garner or something, you know. Do you guys have an actor in mind when you think about the character? Like if you saw the movie, like I thought the nice thing about the movie with Billy Zane is he actually got in shape, so he didn't have to wear a hat.
I thought Billy Zane, like, the movie sucked in parts, but in a lot of ways there was a lot of right with the movie, and I thought Billy Zane, like, he played a good Phantom but also a good Kit Walker. Like when I look at like when I look at some of the Batmans, like and stuff like that, like I thought Ben Affleck plays a good, he plays a good Bruce Wayne, but he's probably not as strong as Batman. Where I think Billy Zane did a good job playing both, if that kind of makes sense. That's the way I see it, anyway.
I would agree with that. But I don't think you'd want to be motoring along in 2018 with Billy Zane necessarily in mind as the actor for the Phantom either, because that probably creates the wrong impression. You know, that's the Phantom who has a magic skull ring and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure that that's the right one to try and channel.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't really have. I just sort of have that standard handsome hero head, and that's a tricky thing too, because I have to draw him where you can't show his face, but that he's relating to his wife in bed, which Paul did a little bit, but Barry never did.
Yeah. Well, there was one.
A lot of things where, you know, their couple is laying in bed, and it's like I have to find some kind of tricky way of like either putting the balloon over his face or cropping his face or having something, shadow or something like that. So that, you know, there's a lot of tricky stuff with the character in that way.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's Barry famously did a story called The Normal Life, where it was a story of the Phantom exploring the possibility of becoming a normal person. But in that story, him doing the dishes and mowing the lawn and all that, he was still in his Phantom uniform. So, you raise a good point. It's like the Phantom, like say for instance, like a lot of characters, their alter ego is the hero, whether it's Superman or Batman. But with the Phantom, his alter ego is Kit Walker.
Right.
So do you find that that Judge Parker and the Phantom balance each other well in terms of that more, you know, family conversational, action, for want of a better word, in Judge Parker versus all of the actual physical action? I think I saw a comment of yours on Facebook just the other day, it might have been yesterday, about Judge Parker was really starting to liven up because now the characters were talking to each other in a car instead of just in the kitchen or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, a soap opera strip is never going to be as exciting as a superhero strip. But you can have people do things. Like this week in Judge Parker, I actually completely ignored what Francesco wrote as far as the location. And I had them go into the kitchen of the cottage, and I had Nettie make some tea, and there was 2 cups of tea, and she was poured one, and then she got mad because she's arguing with Abby, her stepmom, and goes, leave right now, get out. So she didn't pour the second cup. Now none of that was in the script. None of that was in the script. But that's my job, is to try to take stuff and make it interesting rather than just have 2 people standing in the middle of the room, yak, back and forth. Just to read that, right?
Yeah.
So like the whole thing with the girl in the hoop skirt in the last story with the locust. Right. So that girl is based upon my assistant, Mimi, which I did as fun because sometimes they'll do that. I'll put a friend in the story or whatever. But the whole thing with the guy, so they're on top of Walker's table, and then they come out to fight the Phantom. And I figure, because you had the black chick wearing like her kind of militant outfit, and the other girl, maybe she ran out because the one was already out, so she'd have her coat on. The other girl would run out and maybe didn't have her coat on, so I decided to have the guy give her his jacket that had the rawhide stuff on it, like Tonto.
Oh yeah.
So I have to draw 7 different types of people. So I think Tony wanted mix the races up. So you got like a Mexican guy maybe, and a couple black guys, a couple white guys, a white girl, a black girl. So it's interesting, right? So you have but then I added that whole little other thing just because it's interesting rather than just have people standing around.
Yeah.
Have the guy put the coat over her. None of that was in Tony's script. That was all me deciding to do things like that. Which is interesting because sometimes people pick up on things and they'll run with that. And then sometimes people pick up on things that you had that's like, it's not even that at all. Like one of the things that gets me probably the most about some of the feedback is that people immediately assume that you as a creator are trying to do something to fuck the character up, trying to mess the character up. They assume that you just came into the office that day, the studio that day, and sat down and you go, today I'm going to jack up the Phantom. I'm just going to mess this whole thing up on purpose. And it's like, no, that's not so it's weird what they read into and then what they completely misread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you mentioned Mimi as your assistant. Now, a lot of people... so who is Mimi? You want to tell us a little bit about her and how you came upon using her as an assistant and stuff like that?
Mimi is a student that I met. She's a very good young artist. I've been looking for an assistant for a while, so I was lucky that I met her. And I first hired her to help square away some of my art. But then I had her start doing backgrounds because doing both of the strips, I've had my friend Scott Cohn help me do ink some stuff, and I had my friend when my friend Ricardo Villagran was here. He would help me a little bit on Judge Parker. So just doing both strips, it's great to have somebody to do to ink some of the backgrounds and do stuff. I mean, I'm sure Cy Berry had most of the strip guys had a lot of assistants.
Yeah. Yes.
And the difference is that they got paid more than me, right? Yeah. The dollar went further. So Niff had several assistants, including people to letter, right? Tex Blaisdell is a guy who used to do a lot of backgrounds for a lot of different people. Leonard Starr, I think Stan Drake. He did a lot of backgrounds for people. And he was a guy who could match people's styles. So I've had assistants off and on over the years, and it's good to have the extra company in the studio, and it's good to pass the knowledge from one cartoonist or one artist to the next generation, and that is simply the best way to do it on the job, learn on the job. And I learned, I was never Al Williams as an assistant, but I did get to share his studio for a while, and I did learn from watching him work much the way, because I was already working by then, but the same way I learned from Ricardo Villagran, watching him work, and who knows, I've learned stuff from Mimi because she's very good at using the Wacom the Cintiq and things like that. So that's also a huge difference. The amount of technology that I have to use to do my job compared to what Cy Berry did.
Yeah.
He drew it, nailed it in, and that was it.
Yeah. Well, just before we get to the technology, just to, I think there's a bit of curiosity or interest around Mimi, if only because there's been very few female artists who've worked on the Phantom before. So she's doing more and more of the backgrounds on the strip over time.
She does. It varies per week, depending upon what help I need. And like some weeks she might do more on Judge Parker. She's also in school, so yeah. So she's in school, so at the same place that I went to, the Pennsylvania College of Fine Arts. So she's there as an illustration student. So so some weeks she's busy doing her stuff, but yeah, it varies. So like, you know, tonight she might ink some backgrounds, tomorrow on Judge Parker, or she might, you know, ink something on the Phantom. She was doing stuff last week, and then I think the week or two before that, not as much because she had like assignments that were due at school.
Yeah,
so.
Sure.
Yeah.
So do you think, and I you can't speak for her, but would she have ambitions to do a strip of her own one day, or become
I mean, she's very she has. I mean, she's very good. I mean, I wouldn't hired her otherwise. She's very good. She's doing her own comics now. I don't know if she would want to do a strip. I think she might like to do comics. She's interested in comics, but she reads a lot of webtoons and she reads a lot of stuff like that. What I find interesting is that the students that I have now I teach a high school illustration class. I've been teaching since like 2010. So I see a new crop of say 14 to 18-year-olds every year. Mm-hmm. And what the 15-year-old now reads today is nothing like what the 15-year-old read 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now kids don't know who Calvin and Hobbes is. Kids don't. The baby booms has boomed. And now you're getting post baby boom kids, and those kids are all about what's online and all about what's free.
Yeah,
and you know, art students are always a little bit different than the average person because you're an artist, so you're usually going to read a little bit more probably. But I have a lot of students that don't really like to read, so they don't, you know, I can show them the comic strip and maybe they've heard of the Phantom, maybe, but it just seems like it's kind of a weird thing to them. They don't really, they just, you know, but you know, Mimi's, you know, early 20s, so she reads comics, but she doesn't really read superhero stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of young people now, like most of the kids that are watching Black Panther tonight will never read a Black Panther comic book.
Yeah.
You know, and most of the people that read the Phantom have gray hair.
Oh, I've still got
none at all anymore.
Yeah, in case of I've still got some normal colour hair.
but we are both on the younger side of the Phantom fans, aren't we, Jim?
Yeah, well, maybe me, not so much you.
Let that
but
slide.
No, you're right. Fru is currently doing a kid Phantom, which is targeting the 8 to 12-year-olds, like, which is Dan's younger son's age, because so obviously, you know, and then even my daughter, she absolutely loves this TV show called Superhero High Supergirls. And so she's got a couple of their comics that she reads as well, and my daughter's only 3, so you're right that that there's definitely there seems to be a bit of a push trying to get this next generation into those comics again.
Yeah, I figure we've got 10 years left on the strips, maybe a little bit more. Things were pretty bad a few years ago. A lot of the papers that were closing. Right now, I think maybe 10 years left on newspaper strips, unless we suddenly have another like really bad spot. Because the fact is my dad's 85, so there's the people like him who've been reading it. Then there's the next. I mean, most people are reading Judge Parker are probably in their 60s, 70s. I know that just from the people, you know, irregardless of the people online on the message boards. But the people who've been reading and the people that write me, you know, I just turned 56, so I'm a spring chicken compared to a lot of the people, you know, who've been reading the stuff. And, you know, I'm probably at the edge of people who would even be interested in doing this.
Yeah.
At 56, I'm at the edge of people who would be interested in the craft of cartooning, the craft of doing a comic strip, and because there's just so many other things out there to do, and because of my age and my fondness for the craft, the appreciation of the craft of doing this, so you know, it does help coming across younger artists, you know, like Mimi. But yeah, I don't know whether she would be a person who would want to do maybe not something like the Phantom, but there's a lot of people that, as you know, that are doing web strips now. So that's where the younger, you know, I'm probably the end. I am probably the end of people that would be doing, because the adventure strips are at the end now. I mean, there's only a few of us left. Yeah,
there's the Phantom, Prince Valiant, Mandrake died, 10 years ago, with stopped.
Mandrake stopped when
Fred Fredericks.
And I know that they kept that going for him. I don't think it was in very many newspapers, so I don't think that he was Phantom still is in a lot of newspapers, and like you obviously you guys are examples. There's a big, huge worldwide fandom of his adventures, unlike, you know, Judge Parker or you know, a lot of the other you know, maybe Spider-Man might be in as many papers. I don't know.
Because Alex Saviak, who's most fandom people know of, who he does I think he inks the Sundays. Of Spider-Man. So he's still doing those.
Well, there'd certainly be a huge outcry, or would be a huge outcry in Australia if the Phantom Daily Strip stopped, because there's a number of papers who have gone through cost-cutting processes over the last few years, and certainly my local paper stopped running the Phantom for a while, but then there was such a response to the letters to the editor, and actually a local real estate agent started sponsoring the strip, so it came back.
That happened in...
A legacy strip like the Phantom is also more expensive.
Oh, right.
So the old strips are more expensive, and like Judge Parker is more expensive than... They if you notice, they don't try to really launch too many new strips, partially because the newspapers are trying to get rid of. They would like to get rid of all the strips. The papers just want to put tire ads or ads, you know, milk or something. They don't want. But the people who buy papers go, "Where are my comic strips?" Because in the last year, I think three papers tried to get rid of Judge Parker, and all the people wrote in, and they ended up keeping them. So I'm assuming it's the same with the Phantom. Yes. You know, the people that are left buying the newspaper really love these characters, and that's what they figure every day I plop down my 50 cents, 75 cents to get my newspaper, and there's no Phantom. But if you take all the features out, what do you have left? Because the news cycle is so fast today. Most papers are not like the Washington Post or the New York Times, where you have like a big, in-depth editorial and reporting, staff. So what do you have left? You don't have any features. Then what? Are you going to read about the car accident that you heard about 2 days ago? I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it's already. You know, we've already got it on our Facebook feeds and stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's a good point.
I see somebody else has joined us.
Yeah, Stephen. How you going, mate?
I'm doing well. How's everyone here?
Pretty good.
So, Stephen, meet Mike. Mike, this is Stephen.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, Mike, how you going?
Good.
Anyway, sorry for interrupting. How's the talk going?
Yeah, good. Actually, given that there's a little bit of an interruption there, maybe we can shift sideways a bit there, Mike. You mentioned before about the advance of technology and using digital art and that sort of thing. When we spoke to Jeff Weigel, he said that he creates all of his stuff digitally, but you are still a bit of a pen and paper man?
Yes, I mean, I was just working on a daily of the Phantom today that I was actually drawing digitally because I'm using some photo reference because they're inside the Met. So in the old days, I would have an artograph, which was a projector, and so I would put my photograph in there, project it down, and then, do my drawing, and then ink it, right? Oh, yeah. Now, I'm all old school. I love old school. I did buy, because Mimi had the Cintiq, so I was using her Cintiq. And all my friend Scott, who was helping me on the Phantom over the summer on the Old Man Mole's story, he does storyboards for commercials and film and stuff. And he kept saying, "Oh, you need to get a Cintiq." So I've had a digital Wacom tablet for a long time. So I finally broke down and I bought myself a 13-inch Cintiq. And then Mimi was helping me program the button.
Did you feel dirty using it?
Well, what happened was I did a month of Judge Parker with it, but I started getting carpal tunnel syndrome. My forearm started getting sore. I still did the Phantom traditionally because I know there's a lot of people that like to buy the art.
Sure.
So
yep, including us.
Right. So I'm doing this one today digitally because it's easier, and I don't want to get my old projector out and all that stuff. So yeah, I get my script digitally, right, from Tony. I letter it digitally because even if I were going to letter it by hand, add extra time for me to letter it by hand. There's nobody does. I mean, if I was doing a Wizard of Id or something, you could letter it by hand because you'd have your bouncy, fun, cartoony lettering. But there really are no guys who do lettering anymore. I mean, I know Todd Klein and people like that, but they do their stuff digitally too. Nobody really does. The only guy I know that still does hand lettering, I think, is Walt Simonson on his book, and he still works with John Workman, and that's his book. So he can say, I want John to, letter my originals. But nobody, I know when Jeff does this thing digitally and Terry was doing his Phantom digitally, I still like to draw on paper. And so unless I am forced to give up doing the Phantom on paper, I will probably always do it on paper, although I got a big stack of stuff now.
of old artwork.
Oh my God! I've got stacks and stacks.
Look, if it's starting to clog up the studio and you just need to get rid of it.
yeah. I can give you my address.
I'll pay with a few hands up
as well. You're gonna when I started, we had they just started using fax machines, so everybody was. I always tell this to the students. So when I started, I worked just like Jack Kirby. Piece of paper, pencil, done. Took the stuff into the office, done. Got the script, came back home. Script was typed up on a typewriter. Yep.
Xerox, given to me. Now, then we went to faxes. They're faxing and FedExing. People were faxing farts back and forth to each other. Everybody was sending a fax. Then, and the world moved at the speed of a fax. Then everybody, 94, I got my first computer. Then everybody's emailing. And then eventually, when I was still working on Batman, they still mailed me the script. They still sent me the paper, all that stuff. And I stopped comics in 96 full time, and that's when I went into animation. So we were still getting the script, getting the paper, inking on board, lettering on board, I've still done comics since then, but in that time frame of me going on and doing the strips, everything now is digital. Everything is digital delivery. No, most places don't even have an art staff. King does not have an art staff. If you look at the old strips, you'll sometimes see a blue wash or a blue pencil on the strip. And what they would do is they would do that to indicate where they wanted the zipatone. They'd send it into the office. The production people in the office would apply the Ben-Day, which is an old version of zipatone, with rubber cement down on the art. The artists didn't do that. They did that in the syndicate.
Oh, wow.
Now you have to give them all that stuff because they don't have any production artists at all. In fact, if there has to be any correction on the art at all, I have to do it. They don't have a staff to do it like they used to in the old days.
Oh, wow. Because I've got a couple of... I've got a Wilson McCoy Daily, and it's got some zipatone on it as well. So that's interesting that it wasn't actually done by McCoy.
No, most of the guys. Now, some of the guys, like Al did some himself, but I think a lot of the guys would just indicate where they wanted it, and then they would mail it in, and So everything moved at the speed of the mail. Now everything moves at the speed of a text. Everything moves at the internet. So, I went from having 12-week production deadlines when I was still working at DC to now, they can print an entire run of a book in a matter of probably like an hour or two.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So, you said you've got a stack of originals. Now, I've got to ask this because it's going to be a question that a lot of listeners are going to be asking. Now, I have seen that you've done a few character sketches of the fan that you sold on eBay along with some of your art. Is that something that you will be looking at doing more of?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about trying to do some this weekend. I've been been very busy. But yeah, I was planning to do some more and put some more stuff up on eBay. I feel bad for people overseas because it's so expensive to mail stuff to Australia.
Yeah, it is.
And rates went up after the first of the year, I was told. So.
Yeah, it normally does. So if people are interested in buying originals, is it best just to wait until they find their way on eBay, or?
They could do that, or they can
contact you.
They could just email me and see if that's one that because I don't want to sell everything, but there is some stuff I do want to sell, and ask me if that's for sale, and or they can get a commission if that's something that they're interested in.
Which will save you getting ripped off with eBay fees as well.
Yeah, although the fees on eBay aren't that. They really aren't that bad. It's more the fee. It's more the process of filling out the customs forms to send something overseas that actually takes longer. And it seems like every time I go to the post office to do that, they change something on the form.
Okay, yeah. Well, maybe what a lot of the listeners can do is get a couple of yous that are interested and get a couple mailed instead of just doing the one, and then you can save on shipping that way. So that might be a bit of a hint. Yeah, a bit of a hint for some of the listeners that are interested in getting some Manley original art. I will be talking to you as well, Mike, about some of that.
I guess linked to that, when we spoke to Cy Barry, and I know it's a very different time, but he has pretty famously had some legal issues around the ownership of his art and that sort of thing. And I guess partly that's because he had to physically mail it into King Features, like you said, and whether he ever got it back or not. But I guess because you just scan it and send it in and it never leaves the studio, so to speak, there's no issues with that?
No, and I mean... I think some of the legal issues, maybe with Barry, had to do with how the contract is worded.
Yeah.
So he created a lot of characters while working on the strip. And so, of course, if they go and they make a movie or a TV show or whatever, then, I'm sure he would want some compensation for that. Yeah. And, it's always that push-pull where the companies try not to give you anything if they can possibly get away with it and have all the pie to themselves. And that's why nobody creates anything for Marvel and DC anymore. That's why they're continually mining the Jack Kirby, Stan Lee vein, because after the early 90s, nobody's going to create anything for them anymore.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So the same thing with fandom. If Tony and I created a new character, then, that creates sort of a legal thing where, like, do you get royalties on that character? I mean, they have all kinds of funny things. Like I created a Darkhawk for Marvel, and they made a figure of him last year, and I have a creator contract, and it stipulates in the creator contract what they consider to be an action figure, which must have 5 points of articulation.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have 5. If they had 4 points of articulation, we don't owe you a dime.
Yeah.
5 points of articulation, okay. So it's funny, I think a lot of the acrimony over the years with creators really boils down to, nobody expects to get $1 million, it would be nice, but give me something.
Yeah.
Don't insult me.
Yeah, because from what we understood with the Tony D. Paul situation, that was one of the reasons why he handed in his pen, so to speak, was because there was I think there was a movie license, and they were interested in some of the characters that he created. So so it's interesting. Interesting about that.
Well, I'm sure I know that the Phantom as a character probably always has some rights thing going on where somebody's licensing it for a movie or renewing it for a movie. I mean, with all the Tony and I talked about that. I said I am sure, that those rights have never just been like laying there on the table since the Billy Zane thing, because I'm sure that company or whoever bought the rights from that company or whatever, their king is always probably have somebody interested in making a cartoon or a movie or whatever.
Yes. No, you're correct in saying that. There's been the movie rights ever since. Well, with the Billy Zane, there was the rights for 2 sequels. Billy Zane and Christy Swanson were signed on for 2 sequels. They never end up happening, and then ever since then, it's shifted to probably about 2 or 3 different companies, producers. Sam Worthington was one guy that was for a little period tipped to play the Phantom. And then there's been we had Glenn Ford on probably a couple of years ago the first time, and he talked about a cartoon that almost got into production as well. So there has been. I think you're right in saying the rights are always there. It's just whether something actually happens with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. When you find out how, crazy the process. excuse me, the process is. It's actually amazing that anything actually ever gets made in Hollywood.
Yeah. So I guess that sort of raises the question about your association with King Features, Mike, because when we were interviewing Tony at the time, he basically had to redo a contract when he came back, and now I think it's almost story-by-story basis. You mentioned that you think that the newspaper strip might only have 10 years. left, do you see yourself going all the way through to that? Or are you contracted on a story-by-story basis like Tony is? Or
I usually have a contract that usually goes, I think, a couple of years at a time. So, yep. But I'm just looking at the fact that, you know, if the bulk of the readers that read newspapers are north of 50, a lot of them are like my father in their 80s, right? Or or my mom in her 70s, right? And those people are just going to, through the process of time, age out. At what point do newspapers go, maybe we can't afford the strips? Because, I mean, a lot of the newspapers in Philly don't carry the strips anymore. So that's just my, I don't know. It's like you one thing about being a commercial artist is you sort of have to always have like one ear to the horizon. Yeah. One ear, one nose to the grindstone, but one ear to the horizon. I think right now we're probably fairly safe, and I sort of feel like if things were to go poorly, the syndicate would probably say, well, we're going to renew, but we might have to cut your rate. If they lost too many papers, because that's where your income is based on. Partially is also how many newspapers you're in.
Sure.
Yeah. So does that mean you would get more, if the Phantom's in more newspapers, you would get more doing the Phantom than what you would with Judge Parker?
Yes, because, I mean, I'm sure that's why, those guys back in the day were making really good money.
Yeah.
Comic strip guys wanted to have a newspaper strip. The newspaper strip guys wanted to be illustrators, and the illustrators wanted to be fine artists.
Yeah.
Like Norman Rockwell and N.C. Wyeth had that crisis in his career where he wanted to be a fine artist, right? He was a fantastic painter, as good as any fine artist. He just painted pirates instead of, I don't know, bowls of fruit. Oh, he did paint amazing bowls of fruit too. But yeah, but in the comic world, the comic book guys wanted to be the strip guys, because the strip guys made a lot of money, and it was looked at as being legitimate, as opposed to comic books, which were kind of, everybody loves comics now, but comics
wasn't always like that.
No, it was not like that even like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Even 10 years ago, it was not like that. Now, because of all the movies, and geek culture is mainstream culture now.
Yeah, like with shows like Big Bang Theory and all of this other type of stuff, being a geek is kind of cool now. Like when I was at high school, you almost, I had the Phantom comic, you almost had to hide it in your workbook or in your lunch or in your backpack reading it, because, it wasn't cool reading the Phantom or a comic.
Yeah, so it's funny because even at the Academy now they have an illustration program, and so there's all kinds of posters for comics and everything. And when I was first at the Academy, people knew that's what I did, and many of my teachers, it turns out, were fans of the comics. Some of them actually fans of the Phantom. But now, like, everybody loves graphic novels and comics and everything. So it's much more accepted as being something that's like, oh, well, we want to get kids to read so we can get them to read comics. That was not necessarily the case when I was in school. Like, what, you read comics? You're a juvenile delinquent, Yeah,
well, even the comic book shops these days are a lot more slicker and stuff like that. I remember, even 10 years ago, you go to a comic book shop and you would feel like you have to walk out and have a shower afterwards, because it was, it was dirty, it was grimy, and you had to go through back issues that were, stashed somewhere and stuff like that. But, they're all slick and commercialized now.
Yeah, it's funny, as the business has thinned, I guess the people that are left are people that were the better business. They have a better business model. The guys that were just selling pogs and all that other stuff, they all bit the big one. But yeah, so I figure we probably got 10 years maybe on these types of strips. I think you will probably always have something. Who knows? I mean, they may just migrate to being online. I mean, I know that the Phantom has a big circulation. I know Judge Parker has a big circulation. The top strip was Blondie, and Blondie was in over 2,000 papers at one point. So they made pretty good value. I don't know what those strips are in now, but how many papers they're in now. But I know the Phantom does well, like I said, because it's like people like you guys all over the world. People love India and Mexico and Scandinavia. There's people that love. Tony was telling me, he gets letters from all over.
Yeah.
So would you ever be tempted to do a comic book of the Phantom, for instance, whether it's for Hermes Press in America or Frew in Australia or Egmont in Scandinavia?
Oh yeah, sure. I wouldn't have any problem doing that. It would actually be less restrictive because one of the hard things about the strip is that you get that 3 little frames a day, and sometimes I think, oh man, it would be great if I had a whole page and I could really open it up and I try to make it as dynamic as I can, but I'm limited by the size of the frame. I'm limited. I can never change the format. So,
something that I've noticed with your stories recently is that instead of doing 3 panels, you've had one great big panel in a daily.
Almost a splash panel, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's because Tony and I talk. We talk usually just a little back and forth every week over the internet, over email. But I think he was responding to what I do as opposed to, say, what Paul did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I like doing environments. I like, if you give me a big panel, like the big panel where everybody's jumping over the edge, and it really, it allows me to kind of stretch my legs a little bit. And I think it sort of stands out on the page because you don't really see that anymore. You don't see that kind of stuff anymore. And I think it works. It really worked with that story. When everybody was jumping over the edge like that. So I had a lot of fun. When he does that, it's more fun for me because it's more like the stuff I used to do. The more like the stuff. Like the first 4 or 5 weeks of the next story, there's a lot of setup. There's a lot of setup with the Nomad and how he's going to go about with the Nomad and visiting Heloise in New York and stuff. So it's not as much fun or dramatic as at the end of that last story.
Yeah.
So that's a narrative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's part of the nature of the strip is that you only get those couple of panels a day, so it might take you 3 weeks to set something up.
Yeah.
So you've, like we said before, you've been doing the strips for 2 years. It's a fairly small window or short sample. What's been probably your favourite part of drawing the daily so far? Was it the Curse of Old Man Moz, or was there something else that's really excited you or captured your attention?
I liked parts of the Old Man Moz story. He was a fun guy to draw. Again, looking back through the reference of how everybody did him before, like Graham did him a little bit different than Paul did, and so like, that was the other thing in the beginning. I wasn't sure how big Garand was. I wasn't sure how tall he was because he's never been drawn consistently. Like, some people draw him a little fatter. Some people draw him like he's like 3.5 feet tall. like he comes up to the top of the Phantom's belt.
Yeah.
You know, and even when I would go back and I would look at the Barry stuff, it was never consistent. It was never drawn consistently. So what I did is I tried to sort of split it down the middle. I would look at what Terry did, and I would look at what Paul did, and I figure, well, most of the people reading the stuff now are probably most familiar with that stuff than like a story done in like 1966.
Yep.
You know, so and you know, everybody has their own. Everybody has to put their own stamp on the strip, so to speak. But like I said, I'm always aware of the fact that like I'm playing a role, so I'm not going to go like really radical with something because I know that would just like upset people.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, you're not turning up to your studio every day looking to do that.
Right? Yeah. You know, it's a fun strip. It's a very fun strip. I like the fact that it has a lot of history to it. That it was a good, rich history. It's pretty amazing, and actually, in a way, it's amazing that he lasted. I can see why Mandrake ended, because it's such an anachronism now when you look at a guy going around with a top hat and like a big like black butler servant guy, just like that's the kind of stuff that that doesn't really wash now. I talked to Greg Hildebrandt from the Hildebrandt brothers, the illustrators, and they did Little Orphan Annie.
Yeah.
And the Terry and the Pirates. And so they were going to relaunch Terry and the Pirates, but of course you can't have the type of characters the way they were in the 40s because it would be like super racist now to draw the big stoop and like all those characters. That was the way people drew characters like that, especially during the war and things like that. But the people who remember the old character want the character to look like he did in 1940. So if you do that, you're going to have the people who liked it during the 40s and go, that's okay. You draw people in a very stereotypical way. That's the way I like my character to look. And then you're going to have the Anti-Defamation League on the other hand. Going, what's wrong with you people are so racist. So there's in some ways you can't really update stuff because the character just doesn't work now. The whole thing just doesn't really work. You know, so I think Mandrake it's a harder sell. Yeah. Because what guy runs around wearing a top hat like that?
Well, that's a good point. There was a newspaper article from a couple of years ago that was just recently posted on Facebook again with apparently there's a Mandrake movie in the works, and in the article they actually made mention that they were not going to use the top hat and cape.
And all of the comments immediately were, well, hang on, that's not my Mandrake.
Yeah.
Well, Mandrake does rise a supporting role in the Phantom strip, though, now.
Yeah. I drew a little flashback, but I mean, again, it's like the Phantom lasts because he's a superhero. So I think that things are, you know, a purple suit's a purple suit. But I think that there's certain characters, like you can't do Andy Capp now, where he and his wife used to beat each other up, right? You could not have a strip.
Get drunk and sleep on the couch all day.
Right, yeah. You could not, that would not fly today in the newspaper where you had people getting drunk and beating the crap out of each other. You know, that wouldn't work. So, you know, it's like Netflix is making Lost in Space. So, first of all, you don't have Jonathan Harris. He's passed away. And if they're not going to make it like the old TV show, which I was a huge fan of when I was a little kid, then don't make it something else, because it's going to suck. It's probably just going to suck. It's like it's not going to be what the people who were fans of it are going to be turned off because it's not like what it was. And news people don't really care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember when they did the 90s remake of that. My parents were all very excited about that, and I was just kind of like, yeah, okay. That didn't resonate with me at all, that one.
Yeah, well, see, again, that wasn't, what was it? Because it wasn't what the old show was, but it wasn't really something new. It was just bad. And it had good actors. I mean, John Hurst or William Hurst, a good actor, and Gary Oldman is great. I mean, he's a great villain, but he wasn't Dr. Smith. So,
so the robot wasn't the robot.
Right. He had Suffeld's voice, but it wasn't the. So to me, I think if you made it straight like they made the other show, just did it straight like a continuation, it would be hard to replace Jonathan Harris. Yeah. Although I think he could Sting because he actually looks like Dr. Smith now. If you go look at a picture of Sting right now, pull him up on the internet, and he looks like Dr. Smith. If you did it as a straight thing, see, that's like people are always mad about the campy old Batman. Everybody loved that as a kid. You didn't have any problem with it. I wouldn't have any problem with it now. The problem is you can't really do things now because they would keep winking at you the whole time. And they played it straight. They didn't wink at you. They played it straight. So it's the same way with the Phantom.
It's funny you mentioned that old Batman because in Australia we're getting replays of it on a Friday night at the moment. And again, my 8-year-old, he loves it. And my wife and I sit there and, we wink at each other going, oh, you wouldn't get away with that these days, or gee, how dodgy is that? But he just sits there and he loves it. He can't wait for Friday night to come around so we can watch it again.
Right. I mean, that's how it was when I was a kid. I love that stuff. So I think the Phantom is the same way. If you made him the typical modern superhero, then he would be grim and gritty, and he would have no sense of humor. The Phantom smiles, and Tony and I had a couple talks about that because I think that there's a contingent of the modern reader, who maybe comes to it from the comic books. I don't think he's the same character in the comic books. The stuff that I've seen, he always looked much more like your typical, like the Punisher. And he's not the Punisher, and he's not Batman. Yeah. In fact, there was a sequence that I drew in the Stamp story where Garand blows that stuff in Burley's face, and he's like tripping, and he sees the Phantom pointing at him and yelling at him, "No, Phantom Stamp, you can't do that." Yeah. And Tony thought that maybe I had gone a little bit too far because the Phantom doesn't yell and terrorize people.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, the moment you mention it, I can see that panel. So it certainly it has become, very memorable. Whether that's because it was so different from what you normally expect, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because it triggers the imagination, I suppose, and as you said, in the context of that story, there was the hallucinogenic effect for him as well. So I think the old school Phantom probably wasn't above doing a little bit of terrorism of the bad guys. You've got to be rough on the roughnecks.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess the Phantom doesn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
But he might, beat the crap out of them, I guess, and leave them with that permanent mark on their face. So again, it's we're facing the fact that if you made him too violent, he would appeal to one part of the audience, but then you alienate the other part of the audience. So there was always that middle ground. And again, the syndicate only allows certain things, and the papers will only allow certain things. So I've had in a genteel strip like Judge Parker, there have been more than once I've had to alter the breasts on some of the female characters, or on the first year that Francesco, I had to take out gunplay. Nobody was actually shooting anybody, and bad stuff happened off screen. And I had actually drawn people aiming guns at people previously in Judge Parker. There wasn't any problem. So you never know. Like, a feature editor can come on and go like, well, I don't like these pictures of these characters, and I don't like the way that looks. So I don't want to do it. So it's always going to be probably an issue at some point, just because modern fans want more drama, more action, more violence. You see that on just about every kind of TV show. Like, how does the Phantom fit into the world that has the Game of Thrones?
Yeah. No, and I think you make a good point, like when you're talking about the age demographic of probably the people that are reading the Phantom comics versus the people that are reading the Phantom strips as well.
Right, because most people probably don't even know that there's a strip. If your paper doesn't carry it, it's not even a consideration.
Yeah, that's true. Well, through release, then, have you seen your work in a free comic?
Yeah, I just got some copies a little while ago, I guess, of the last
Christmas special?
Yes. So that was interesting to see. I prefer seeing it in print. I think in print, I guess that's my default thing. I check it online. I work closer with the colorist David. So he sends me stuff, and I go over it and I make changes and suggestions. So that's good, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into, again, to the strip. It's it's more technical than Judge Parker. Yeah.
So David, who colors it, he's a KFS employee?
Yes. He works somewhere down in Florida. Somewhere down in Florida, and because I was wanting to make certain color thing. Like, I color the Judge Parker Sunday, I don't color the daily. But the sets of Judge Parker are pretty much always the same. The kitchen, the barn. You might go to a new place, but then you'll be in that place. But the Phantom, the sets change all the time. So, like, I draw the Skull Cave, but then I might not draw the Skull Cave again for another, couple weeks. Or maybe once at the beginning of the story and once at the end of the story. So, like, I'm drawing New York this week. Next week, I'm drawing where the Nomad is. So I'll be doing that. So I think I have 15 weeks of the story so far. I think up to week 15. So, when I get done, I'm probably another couple of weeks, then I'll get another. And Tony plots it out, but I used to get, when I started, I would get like they had the whole year worth of stuff. But they no longer want. I don't think King wants that anymore. So I'm getting it like story by story.
Yeah. So what did you think of the way Frew printed your work?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it's a little dark here or there. But it looked pretty good. I don't know if you guys are recoloring it there, or are they taking the stuff from the web?
I was kind of hoping you would answer that one.
I think they would get it straight from King Features, wouldn't they?
That's what I thought.
They might. I'd have to go back and compare it. You know what I mean? I'd have to go back and compare it. So.
I can't imagine that Frew is recolouring it because they're. I don't know how much you know about Frew, Mike, but they're only 3 or 4 staff members, and they pump out a comic once a fortnight, so they wouldn't have the time to sit there and recover.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Certainly, if it's already in colour somewhere, they'd be looking to get that version of it for sure.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, well, it's nice to see the stuff and to get a copy when it's reprinted.
No, that's good. All right. Well, any last questions, Dan and Steve? We don't want to take up too much of Mike's time, even though we've taken up 2 hours of it.
Yeah. I guess one thing I was going to ask Mike, and I'd be hypocritical, I suppose, if I didn't actually ask this when we were speaking to you. You've mentioned social media, and you know, you are quite prolific on Facebook, putting stuff up and that sort of thing. And I certainly encourage anyone who's a Phantom fan to you know, go and follow your Facebook feed, because it's really quite enlightening, some of the videos that you've put up from time to time and that sort of thing. Do you the question, I suppose, is around the line between sharing stuff so that people can see the process, and how much do you worry, on the other hand, about spoiling the future of the stories for fans and that sort of thing?
Well, if you notice, what I post has no lettering.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I'm showing you my pencils, or even sometimes I'll show you the pencil and the ink of something, you don't know what this. You can see the drawing, but you don't know what the. So I would never put up stuff that would beforehand that would spoil the story. I do know that there were people on the. There was a thing going around for a while. I think a lot of the artists, frankly, would be happy if they kept the message board up, but eliminated the comment section from the stuff. I mean, it's just, you know, it's very annoying. And then there were some people that were basically stalking me on social media and then going and reposting the stuff on the message boards. And then they got banned for doing that. I mean, I waved the flag myself, because you have to really promote stuff yourself. King really promote stuff. They don't have a staff that, I mean, they can barely police the message board.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't have a staff of people to go out on social media. And if they're going to promote stuff, they're probably not going to promote the Phantom. They're going to promote, I don't know, whatever their top selling, you know, humor strip is, because that's what people, you know, mostly look at. So I do it to just share my process, and to basically say, hey, you know, keep paying attention to the Phantom, or keep paying attention to Judge Parker. So yeah, I would never post like so at the end, when everybody jumped off the cliff and people were wondering for a week whether the Phantom let everybody die, or the Locust let everybody die. I didn't post those drawings to my social media.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't spoil, like, oh, they're alive. You know, I didn't want to spoil that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the videos probably the most, because one of the reasons why I collect original art is I like seeing the work that's actually involved in that page or that panel. You know, my old man, or my stepdad's an artist or slash letterer, so I've always had that. I don't have the skills, but I've always
the appreciation.
Yeah, I've always had the appreciation for the work that goes behind whatever it is, and so I've, you know, like watching that video of, you going from, doing the inking and stuff like that. You're just sitting there and you're just memorized. You're just drawn in for the, couple of minutes. And, it's amazing. So I know I've enjoyed probably those the most.
Oh, well, that's great. I mean, I'd like to do more. I'm trying to get a little rig set up so I could do more of that. Because I always remember, like, this. That's one of the reasons why I did the Draw magazine, was because I remember being very serious, like I said, as a teenager. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a professional cartoonist. Very few limited resources to see how I still remember the first time I saw an actual original comic book page. I think I was 15, and I had driven to a small local comic book convention, and somebody had a little stack of pages, and it was just like mesmerizing to actually, for the first time, see this is how big it is. This is what, and then it's another thing to see somebody use a pen or see somebody use a brush. I mean, now there's YouTube, so you can see a bajillion people doing just about anything, but it's another thing to see somebody who's been doing it for a long time, and so I know that there are people out there like you who do just like, I mean, I do. I like watching videos of other people paint and draw too. It's always, we all use the same stuff, but it's always fascinating to see what the other person does. You might learn something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. Stephen, you got any last questions you want to quickly ask before?
The only thing I can say, and you probably answered before I got there, how long does it take to do a daily strip, like just one day? Does it take a whole day? Does it take a couple of hours? Or do you do a whole bunch at once?
I usually try to, I have on occasion had to do an entire week in a day. That's a long day, like staying up 24 hours. I usually can pencil 4 in a day. And I can usually easily ink 4 in a day. Again, this depends upon what is on the page, Yeah. Like the end of the Locust, when everybody was jumping off the cliff and there's like a bajillion locusts. So that helps Mimi do the backgrounds helping with some of the backgrounds on that, because it was just a lot of labor to kind of get that scale. So I was doing some stuff where I could do the figures, then I could give her some of the background, then I can jump on. So it's like you're going back and forth doing both things. So I try to organize my time. So I do all of Judge Parker.
Yeah.
And do all the Phantom, or I might pencil all of Judge Parker and be inking part of the Phantom. So, like I said, I go back and forth where in general, I try to get up and do the penciling early in the day and do the inking later in the day, because it's easier to ink even when I'm tired. It's almost like a different set of muscles than to draw, because you're having to figure stuff out. You're like, oh man, why did I draw that? Like, I don't like the way that eye looked. I don't like the expression on that face, and you redraw it like 10 times,
Yeah.
So again, that's why having Mimi as the assistant, because then I can kind of split up things. She can work on something, I can work on something, and there is usually a little overlap at some point when both strips are actually going. So it typically 3 or 4 dailies can be penciled in a day, depending upon what's on. Like if it's like, like that week, that was a busy week, because I had all 7 people running and all 8 people running, and then the Phantom and all the Locust. So that was a busy week. Last week was a busy week because I had Walker and his wife and the 2 girls sometimes were in every panel. So when you have multiple figures in a panel, it takes, jungles are easy, backgrounds are easy, because then you get to just kind of have fun with the shapes and stuff. But if you like having to draw like a Black Hawk helicopter, anything technical like that takes longer. And I noticed if you look at the old strips, you can tell when the guys are having to cut bait because they just cut the background out. They'll have like one really complicated, one nice strip with a full background, and then it'll just be heads with no background.
Yeah.
Because you get behind the deadline, and so you figure, well, I give everybody this one, we know where it is, and then you just simply have to cut bait. I mean, that's the thing on doing both strips. Yeah. I mean, it's easily a 60, 70-hour week job to do that much work, and that's why every guy who was doing this had assistants or multiple assistants.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and now that's all on you. Like Terry didn't have an assistant. I think the folks that do Mary Worth, Roy, and June, I think they just found an assistant. And then that's hard too, because you might find somebody who's not that great. You know what I mean? Mimi is fantastic. I mean, she draws really well. She inks well. So that helps quite a bit. If you have a person who's like, they're good at trees, not faces or something, you know, then that makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, so with the amount of time that it's taken you to do the work, you've been very generous with your time. I just want to say thank you for that. You could have drawn
2 dailies in the time we've spoken about this.
I hope we don't put you too far behind schedule.
No. I learned early to learn how to talk and work at the same time.
So are you drawing at the moment?
Yes, I was working on this one panel. Well, it's another big spread, whereas the people, Tony said I could put whatever museum I wanted in the back. So I drew the room at the Met that has all the John Singer Sargent paintings, because he and Sue Wyeth are my favorite painters. So I'm drawing the people standing in the room looking at John Singer Sargent paintings. So,
is it possible to know the date of that? So when it comes up, we can kind of like say that like that while you were drawing that, we were talking to you.
Let me see here. I think it is the. I think it is the 312. Yeah, the 312 strip.
Okay, cool.
It's the Monday 312 strip.
Oh.
We might have to rock paper scissors amongst ourselves to see who can buy that one off you.
Well, the thing is because of the way I did this one. I did this one digital because I was using the reference for the back for the.
Oh, of course,
back.
You said that. Yes. Yep.
You know, so it depends on like I said. Traditionally, I prefer to do everything the old-fashioned way, but this way it worked out better. I mean, I'm having to add I got the background done on one layer, and now I'm doing all the figures on another layer.
Oh, yeah.
So I have not stopped working.
Well, we'll certainly be looking out for the 12th of March, that's for sure.
Yes. So if people want to get in contact with you, the best way is via Facebook?
Yeah, that's the best way. That's the best way if people want to get in contact with me is to get in contact with me through Facebook. That's
no worries. Well, I expect a few to probably get in touch regarding some original art, or some commissions, or even maybe a free sketch cover as well. I know you and I
know one person who will be bringing up the free sketch cover.
Yeah. No, me and Mike have talked about that in the past, so we'll have to revisit that one again.
They do sketch covers.
Yeah, so through I'll resend you a couple of the photos. They've released a comic in the main convention in Australia last year. It's got like a real stiff cover.
Okay.
And then it's just like a circle where it's blank. And I've had Jeff do one for me. I've actually just sent some off to Alex as well to get one done as well. So I'll send you a couple of photos as well, so you can have a look at them. But it's kind of nice having the comic with the original art on it, and sometimes it can be a little bit cheaper than a commission for people that are on a bit of a budget and stuff as well. So
well, yeah, I know it's tough for and I don't know what the conventions cost in Australia, but I mean, it can cost you, a pretty penny just to get in for their show for a couple days at some of the con here.
Yeah. So I just want to, from myself, and I'm sure that other guys will want to say thanks as well. I just want to say thanks for joining us, for giving us 2+ hours of your time, Mike. I greatly appreciated it.
Oh well, thanks for asking me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks for letting me interrupt and coming a bit late.
Yeah.
No problem. I was more than happy to do it, and I'll be. You can write my name on one of those little in the catacombs of the Phantom. You can put my
Exactly. Yep, we will. So thank you for that.
Sure, and then just let me know when it's was going to go up live, and I'll plug the heck out of it on my social media.
Awesome.
Will do.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, you guys have a good weekend. Or I guess it's Monday now, right? Or Sunday. Sunday morning.
Sunday, yeah.
Sunday morning.
So you better get to church then. You better hurry.
Get out and mow the lawn.
I'm actually on the way to church now. So after this.
Okay. All right. Well, you guys have a good one.
Yeah.
Cheers, mate. Mike. You too.
Bye.
Thank you, Michael, for that. Dan and Steve, how good was that?
Oh, mate, I just love talking to these guys. Someone who's got so much experience in the industry, and obviously they're not going to bring someone onto the dailies of the newspaper without a wealth of experience behind them. But just so informative, and I just can't believe how long Mike was prepared to sit there and talk to us for. He answered every question and every little path we wanted to go down, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. Like, even though I came in, well, I thought it was going to come in halfway, but maybe I came in 2/3 of the way through, and so I'm really keen to listen back to the podcast and hear what I missed out, because what I did hear was great.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how much work as well he puts into it. As well, so that blew me. Question that you asked about, what was it? It's amazing.
The length of time.
Yeah, the length of time. It's always good talking to the people behind the comic and behind the drawing and stuff like that. A few things I kind of wanted to say but I didn't really get a chance was Dorothy McCoy. Wilson McCoy's wife used to do the lettering on his dailies and Sundays. And also another little thing that not many people would know is that Alex Seviak's wife has in the past done some inking for the Phantom as well.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, so just a couple of little tidbits that might interest a couple of people. I think it's more like Alex says here, colour in that black. That needs to be black, so just colour it in black. He says that it has helped, saving a little bit of time here and there. So
yeah, for sure. Oh, look, you certainly can't begrudge these guys for getting some assistance. And I think that sometimes, the wink and a nudge about Cy Barry having assistants to do his work sometimes is maybe a little bit disparaging, and I'm not sure that that's entirely fair. You hear the amount of detail that goes into a strip that we sit there and it takes 5 seconds for us to read over a morning coffee, and then maybe an extra 30 seconds to actually digest what's going on. But there's a power of work that goes behind
yes.
it. So you can't begrudge these guys for a bit of help. And I really am. I think it's fantastic that we've got a fully fledged female artist on the the credit list, if not as the main artist.
Yep.
More power to the whole process, I think.
Yeah, definitely. You can tell you've got daughters. It's it's very true. There's I think one of the recent Egmont stories was inked or coloured by a female artist as well. I can't remember her name. I think it was Raphael Ruse's assistant. Okay. I think it might have been from top of my head. But yeah, you're right. There hasn't been enough. So thank you everyone for listening. It's a little bit longer than normal, which even with our normal long episodes, but you don't get the chance to talk to people of the caliber of Mike Manley every day, or to listen to people like that all the time, and so you grab the opportunity and you take it for as much as you can. He was very, very gracious with his time. So don't forget, you can follow us on all the social media outlets. We've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, smoke signals, and everything else. Don't forget, you've got your Patreon. So just so you're aware that things that gives you that helps us to be able to do what we do with the hosting of the website and stuff like that as well, but also helps us to get stuff that we can use to better benefit you guys. So one of the things we are looking at is some video editing software, so we can do better stuff, but also so we can record our chats with artists and stuff like that as well. So so we're getting there. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Dan and Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure.
And really nice to have you on board today, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for me to be here.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good to join. My daughter's just come in for a morning hug.
Yeah, my two boys opened up the garage door just a minute ago just to see if I was still here.
Good morning.
All right, on that note, I think we better say
happy
guys.
Phantoming.
Happy Phantoming.
Hey, happy Phantoming.
500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die.
The Phantom!
The ghost who walks.
The Phantom!
Enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you.